The cold night air in Seoul smelled like fried street food and exhaust smoke. The narrow alley behind the Hongdae restaurant district was lit by a single buzzing street lamp, and the crowd that had gathered there was not a friendly one. Ose stood with her back pressed against a damp brick wall. Her apron was still tied around her waist. She had just finished her shift. She had not even made it half a block before her phone rang, and the voice on the other end told her to come around the back. That was the voice of Chitty. She had trusted that voice once. Now she was not sure why. Chitty stood in front of her with his arms folded across his chest. He was a Nigerian man, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline that Ose used to find handsome. Now it only reminded her of every lie he had ever told her. Behind him stood two other men she had never seen before. Korean men. Big. Silent. Watching. "You told someone about the arrangement," Chitty said. His voice was low and controlled, but there was something coiled inside it. Something waiting to snap. "Who did you tell?" Ose kept her chin up. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me, Ose." He stepped closer. The lamplight caught the tension in his jaw. "You've been in Seoul long enough to know what kind of people I work with now. You think they play?" "I told no one anything," Ose said. "Because I don't know anything. You never tell me anything, Chitty. You just show up when you need something from me." The slap came without warning. It was not hard enough to knock her down, but it was hard enough to make her head turn. Hard enough to make the sound echo off the brick walls. Hard enough for the two Korean men behind Chitty to exchange a glance. Ose's hand flew to her cheek. She stood very still. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying in front of men like Chitty only made them feel more powerful. She bit down on her bottom lip and tasted blood, and she turned her eyes back to him. And she looked at him with the kind of steadiness that comes from surviving things that should have broken you. "I want you to understand something," Chitty said, leaning close now, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow worse than shouting. "You are not in Nigeria anymore. No one here cares about you. No one will come looking. So when I tell you to keep your mouth shut, you keep it shut. Are we clear?" Around the corner, the street noise continued. Somewhere a car horn honked. Somewhere a group of young people laughed and ran past the alley entrance without looking in. Ose was invisible. She was always invisible. Just another foreign worker in a city too busy to notice. Then the alley went quiet in a very specific way. Not the quiet of emptiness. The quiet of presence. The kind of silence that falls when something powerful enters a space and everything else instinctively recognizes it. The two Korean men behind Chitty stopped leaning on the wall. One of them straightened up. The other took a step back. Ose did not understand why. Not at first. Then she saw the man standing at the alley entrance. He was tall for a Korean man. He wore a dark coat that fell to his knees. His hands were in his pockets. His face was still, the way a lake is still just before it freezes over. He was looking at Chitty with the kind of calm that is more frightening than anger, because anger at least has limits. Behind him, two other men stood a few paces back. They did not move. They did not need to. Their presence alone communicated everything that needed to be communicated. Chitty turned slowly. When he saw the man in the dark coat, something changed in his posture. The confidence drained out of him like water from a cracked jar. His arms unfolded. His chin dropped slightly. The man in the dark coat did not speak immediately. He looked at Ose first. His eyes moved to her cheek where the slap had landed. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Then he looked at Chitty. "You put your hand on a woman on my street," the man said. His Korean was quiet and precise. One of the men behind him translated into English without being asked, his voice flat and professional. Chitty's mouth opened and then closed again. "I asked a question," the man said. Chitty licked his lips. "This is a private matter. Nothing on this street is private from me." The man pulled one hand from his pocket and turned it slowly, examining his own fingers as if considering something. "Who are you working for?" Chitty said nothing. The man finally looked away from him and looked at Ose again. "Are you hurt?" Ose stared at him. The question was so simple and so unexpected that for a moment she forgot to answer. "I'm fine," she said finally. He nodded once. Then he looked back at Chitty, and without raising his voice at all, without changing his expression at all, he said something in Korean that Ose did not understand. But the effect on Chitty was immediate. The man took 2 steps backward. His shoulders curved inward. He was afraid. "Go home," the man in the dark coat said to Ose. In English this time. direct, without embellishment. If you believe love should be fought for, protected, and sometimes tested by fire, then this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful Afro-Korean love stories filled with passion, betrayal, loyalty, and unexpected twists. The next story might be even more intense than this one. Like this video, comment your country, and share it with someone who believes in ride-or-die love. Let's build a global community that understands that real love has no borders. And before you go, I have a special request for you. Comment a name you would love to see featured in my next story. It could be your name, an African name, or even a Korean name you love. Who knows? Your name might become the next powerful character in one of my stories. Ose did not move right away. She looked at Chitty. She looked at the two Korean men who had been watching. She looked at the man who had just walked into the alley as if he owned it. And then she picked up her bag from the ground where it had fallen, and she walked out of the alley, and she did not look back. She did not know his name. She did not know what he was. She only knew that when she stepped onto the lit street and began walking home, her hands were shaking, and she was not sure if it was because of what Chitty had done, or because of the feeling that lingered from the moment that other man had looked at her. That feeling was not fear. It was something else entirely. The man's name was Jin-woo Park, and by morning, every person in that alley would know what it meant to have crossed someone connected to him. But Ose did not know that yet. She walked home through the cold Seoul night with her cheeks still stinging and her heart beating too fast, and she told herself the same thing she always told herself. She was fine. She was strong. She would keep going. That was 3 weeks before everything changed. The night Mrs. Park's son collapsed on the sidewalk near Mapogu was a Thursday. It was the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you realize it has found you. The kind of cold that makes people walk faster and look at their phones instead of looking at each other. Ose was coming home from a double shift. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders were tight. She had exactly 4,000 Korean, one left in her wallet until her next payday. And she was calculating how many days that could stretch when she noticed the small figure on the ground near the bus stop. Most people walked past. One woman slowed, looked, and kept walking. A man in a business suit crossed to the other side of the street. Ose stopped. The woman on the ground was elderly. She was Korean, well-dressed, with white hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. Her handbag had fallen open beside her. She was not unconscious, not fully. Her eyes were open and blinking slowly, like someone trying to remember where they were. Ose knelt down. She had done a short first aid and basic nursing assistance course at the community clinic back in Benin City. She had done it because the clinic needed volunteers, and because learning had always felt like armor to her. She had never imagined she would use it on a cold sidewalk in Seoul. She checked the woman's breathing, checked her pulse. The pulse was there but irregular, and the woman's lips were slightly pale. Ose pulled her thin coat off her own shoulders and covered the woman with it. Then she called the emergency number. The ambulance came in 9 minutes. Ose rode with the woman to the hospital because no one else was there to do it. She sat in the plastic chair outside the emergency room for 4 hours, long after she should have gone home, long after her phone battery had died, long after the feeling in her toes had gone numb from the cold corridor. When a nurse finally came to tell her that the woman was stable, Ose exhaled a breath she had been holding for a very long time. She was about to stand and leave when a soft voice called from behind the curtain. "Is she still here? The girl who helped me." Ose turned back. The woman was lying in the hospital bed with an 4-line in her arm and oxygen sensors on her fingers. But her eyes were open and clear and focused on Ose with an expression that was impossible to look away from. It was not just gratitude. It was recognition, the way an older person looks at someone younger and sees something real and rare in them. "Did you save me?" the woman asked. Ose stepped closer. "I just called for help," she said. "And I stayed." "That is everything," the woman said quietly. "That is more than most people would do." Ose did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just stood there in her waitress uniform with her thin coat still draped over a chair nearby, and she looked at the elderly woman with the quiet steadiness that was her most natural expression. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Ose. I am Park Sun-hee." The woman's eyes softened. "Thank you, Ose." Ose smiled. She picked up her coat, said goodbye to the nurse at the desk, and walked out of the hospital into the cold Seoul morning. She had to be back at work in 3 hours. She did not know the name Park Sun-hee. She did not know what it meant. She walked to the bus stop and stood in the gray early light with her hands in her pockets and thought about calling her mother, who would be awake now back in Benin City, and thought about whether the restaurant owner would give her an advance on her salary, and thought about 100 other small, pressing, ordinary things. She did not know that by the time she reached her apartment, the private hospital room behind her had already received a phone call from the most feared man in Seoul, and that the first question he asked was not about his mother's condition. It was about the girl. The next morning, the hospital changed. Ose did not see it. She was at work, taking orders, carrying plates, smiling at customers who looked through her. But the nurses on the 7th floor of Severance Hospital noticed immediately when the black cars pulled up in the parking lot. 4 of them, and then 2 more. The men who came up in the elevator were dressed in black suits and moved in the particular way of people who have spent their lives making sure that whoever they work for never has to worry about a room. They spoke to the head nurse. They checked every corridor. They positioned themselves in places that were both visible and unobtrusive, a skill that takes years to develop. Then Jin-woo Park walked out of the elevator. He was wearing a dark gray suit today. No coat. He walked at a pace that was neither slow nor fast, the pace of a man who understands that the world will wait for him. The head nurse, a woman who had been working at that hospital for 22 years and had seen many things, found herself taking a small step backward without meaning to. Jin-woo went to his mother's room. He stood at the door for a moment before he entered, and in that moment his face did something it almost never did in front of other people. It cracked slightly. The carefully maintained calm gave way to something private and raw. He looked at the woman in the bed, this woman who had raised him alone after his father died when Jin-woo was 12. This woman who was the only person in the world he was sure loved him without calculation, and something moved through him that he kept very tightly controlled at all times. He stepped inside. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He put his hand over her hand. Mrs. Park's son, he opened her eyes. Jin-woo, she said, and the relief in her voice was the kind that has lived a long time inside the chest before it finally finds the air. How are you feeling? He asked. Better. She searched his face. Don't look like that. I'm not dead. You were on the sidewalk. I was not alone. She squeezed his hand with what strength she had. A girl stayed with me. She called the ambulance. She waited here all night. Jin-woo's jaw tightened slightly. He had already been told about the girl by the hospital administrator, who had been very quick to give him every detail available. Nigerian. Name Ose. Works at a small restaurant in Mapogu. No family connections in Korea. No criminal record. No known associations. That last part was what he found interesting. In Jin-woo's world, everyone had associations. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. Even kindness, in his experience, was usually deployed for a purpose. I want to meet her, Mrs. Park said. Mother, I want to thank her properly. Her eyes were firm. She had the particular stubbornness of a woman who had survived things her son did not fully know about. You will arrange it. Jin-woo looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he nodded. It took his men less than 2 hours to locate Ose. She was still at work when the restaurant owner came to find her, looking flustered and confused, and told her there was a car outside waiting for her. Ose came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron, and she looked at the black car at the curb, and then she looked at the very large, very still man standing beside it, and she felt the exact same feeling she had felt 3 weeks ago in the alley. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. The man beside the car bowed slightly. Miss Ose. Mrs. Park's son, he would like to see you at Severance Hospital. Ose looked at him for a long moment. Then she untied her apron, went back inside, told her manager she needed to leave for a family emergency, which was not entirely a lie because something about this felt urgent in the way that only important things do, and she followed the man to the car. The hospital room was quiet when she walked in. The elderly woman from the night before was sitting up in bed, looking more herself, with color in her cheeks and her hair neatly arranged by someone who clearly cared about details. She smiled the moment she saw Ose, and it was the kind of smile that has nothing strategic in it at all. Ose almost missed the other person in the room. He was standing near the window with his back slightly turned, looking out at the gray Seoul sky. He was very tall, very still, wearing the kind of clothes that do not announce themselves but somehow announce him anyway. Mrs. Park spoke first. Ose, you came. Please sit. Ose sat in the chair beside the bed. She was very aware of the man by the window, but she kept her attention on the woman in front of her, because that was what the situation asked for. "I wanted to thank you properly," Mrs. Park said. "What you did for me was not a small thing. You stayed. Most people don't stay. I couldn't leave you there," Ose said simply. And it was simply true. It had not been a calculation. It had not been a choice in the complex sense. She had simply been unable to walk past. Mrs. Park took Ose's hand in both of hers. Her grip was stronger than you would expect. "Tell me about yourself." Ose paused. People in Seoul rarely asked her that. "I'm from Nigeria, Benin City. I work at a restaurant. Do you like Seoul?" "I like some parts of it." "Which parts?" Ose thought about it honestly. The Han River in the early morning. The market at Namdaemun when it first opens. The way the city is always moving, but still has quiet places if you know where to look. Mrs. Park was watching her with those warm, precise eyes. "You notice things." "I try to." The man by the window turned around. Ose looked at him. He looked at her. He was younger than she had expected. Mid-30s. His face was the kind of face that is difficult to read because it has been trained to show nothing. But the training is so complete that the absence of expression becomes an expression in itself. His eyes were sharp and dark, and they moved over her in the way that a person moves their eyes when they are actually looking, not just glancing. "This is my son," Mrs. Park said. "Jin Woo." Ose nodded in his direction. "Hello." Jin Woo said nothing for a moment. He was looking at her the way he might look at a piece of information that did not fit his existing framework. Then he said, "Thank you." 2 words. Flat and direct, with no decoration on them. But something in the way he said them made them feel heavier than they looked. "You don't have to thank me," Ose said. "I know," he said. And the way he said that, with the faintest trace of something that was almost puzzlement, told her more about him than anything else he could have said. In Jin Woo Park's world, when someone said "you don't have to thank me," it meant they were setting up for the ask. The thank you was the preamble. Everyone had a preamble. But this woman looked at him with the same direct steadiness she had shown the moment she walked in, and there was no ask coming. He could see that, and it confused him in a way he was not accustomed to being confused. Mrs. Park kept Ose for almost an hour. She asked about Nigeria, about Benin City, about Ose's family. Ose answered with the kind of honesty that comes from a person who has decided that pretending takes too much energy. She talked about her mother and her 2 younger brothers. She talked about why she came to Seoul. She talked about the restaurant, about the long hours, about the nights she called home and tried to sound cheerful even when she was not. Jin Woo stood near the window for most of it. He did not participate in the conversation, but he did not leave either. When Ose finally stood to go, Mrs. Park held her hand again. "Come back," she said. Not a request. A statement of expected future events. "Come back and see me when they let me go home." Ose looked at her. Something in the woman's eyes reminded her of her own grandmother. The particular quality of wisdom that comes not from reading books, but from surviving things. She felt something soften in her chest that she usually kept very tightly held. "I'll come," she said. She walked past Jin Woo on her way to the door. He was watching her. She could feel it. She did not stop. But at the doorway she paused, and without fully turning, she said, "She's lucky to have someone who came so quickly." She heard him exhale very quietly behind her. She left. In the corridor, one of the suited men fell into step beside her to escort her back to the car. She walked with her hands in her pockets and her chin up and thought about the way Jin Woo Park had looked at her. Not the way men usually looked at her. Not with that particular calculation that foreign women in big cities learn to recognize and navigate. He had looked at her like she was a problem he needed to understand. She was not sure how to feel about that. Back in the room, Mrs. Park looked at her son with the particular smile of a woman who has known him his entire life and knows the things he does not say. "She's remarkable," she said. Jin Woo said nothing. "Isn't she?" his mother said. It was not a question. He looked out the window at the gray Seoul sky and said, "I'll have someone check her background." Mrs. Park made a small sound. "Of course you will." The background check came back clean. Cleaner than clean, actually. Ose had no criminal record in Korea or Nigeria. No known associations with any of the underground networks that Jin Woo's organization tracked. No history with Chitty or his people, at least not in any way that showed up on paper. She sent money home to her family every month. She had one close friend in Seoul, a Korean-Ethiopian woman named Leah, who worked at a cafe in Mapogu. She attended a small church in Hongdae on Sunday mornings. Jinwoo read the report twice. Then he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it a third time. He was not looking for anything specific. He was looking for the thing that would make her make sense. The angle. The strategy. The hidden motivation behind a person who helped a stranger in the cold and asked for nothing afterward. He did not find it. That bothered him more than anything in the report could have. He gave his men one instruction. No one was to approach Os. No one was to interfere with her daily life. No one was to make her aware that she was being watched over. He called it standard protective protocol because his mother had expressed fondness for the woman, and protecting people his mother was fond of was a reasonable security measure. He told himself this was purely practical. He was almost convincing. 6 days after Mrs. Park left the hospital, Os came to the Park family residence for the first time. It was a house in Songbuk-dong, one of the old money neighborhoods of Seoul where the streets were quieter and the walls were higher. Not ostentatious. The opposite of ostentatious, actually, which is itself a very specific kind of statement. The building was low and wide with traditional design elements, and a small garden visible through the gate. And if you did not know what you were looking at, you might think it was simply the home of a wealthy conservative family. If you did know, you understood that the calm was the point. Os came in her regular clothes. She had considered dressing more formally and then decided against it, because she had noticed at the hospital that Mrs. Park responded to authenticity more than performance, and Os was not willing to perform for anyone. She was shown into the main sitting room by a woman who ran the household, a tidy, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Yoon who looked at Os with the particular brand of unreadable evaluation that domestic staff in powerful households develop as a professional skill. Mrs. Park was sitting in a low chair with a blanket over her legs and a cup of tea on the table beside her. She looked genuinely pleased when Os walked in, the way a person looks when they have been hoping for something, and it actually happens. "You came," she said. "I said I would," Os answered and sat down across from her. They talked for 2 hours. Os talked about food, because Mrs. Park asked about Nigerian food, and Os found herself describing the smell of egusi soup simmering on a gas burner, and the way her mother made jollof rice for special occasions, and the particular sweetness of ripe plantain fried in vegetable oil until the edges caramelized. Mrs. Park talked about the Korean foods she loved. She talked about her own mother's kitchen. She asked Os questions about growing up in Benin City, with the focused attention of someone who finds the world genuinely interesting. Jinwoo came into the room twice. The first time, he crossed to his mother, checked something with her, and left without acknowledging Os directly. The second time, he came in carrying a file folder, and sat down at the far end of the room at a desk, and worked while the two women talked. Os was aware of him. She was always aware of him when he was in a room. She could not entirely explain why. He had a quality of concentrated presence that made the space around him feel more defined. At one point, Mrs. Park said something in Korean that made Jinwoo look up from his desk. He looked at Os. Os looked back at him without looking away. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then returned to his file. Mrs. Park was watching this with the carefully arranged expression of someone who is thinking several thoughts simultaneously and choosing not to share any of them. When Os stood to leave, Mrs. Park walked her to the gate, moving slowly but insisting on it. At the gate, she held Os's face gently between her hands the way elder women do when they are looking at you and seeing more than the surface. "You are a good person," Mrs. Park said. "A genuinely good person. Do you know how rare that is?" Os felt the back of her eyes sting slightly and was surprised by it. She blinked it down. "I'm just trying to do right by people," she said. "That is what makes it rare," Mrs. Park said. She patted Os's cheek, the same cheek where Chitty had slapped her 3 weeks ago, and the gentleness of it after what had happened there was almost more than Os could hold. She walked to the bus stop with her hands in her pockets and the familiar ache of homesickness sitting in her chest, and also something new sitting beside it. Something warmer than homesickness and more confusing than loneliness. She pushed it to the back of her mind and thought about what she would cook for dinner and whether Leah would want to come over. She did not know that Jinwoo had watched her leave from the upstairs window. She did not know that he stood there until the bus came and she got on it, and it pulled away from the stop, and only then did he step back from the glass. His phone buzzed. He answered it. The voice on the other end was one of his senior men, a man named Dae-young, reporting on the situation with a rival organization operating in the Mapo district. Jin-woo listened. He responded with 3 short sentences. He hung up. He did not go back to the window. But for a moment, before he turned away, he thought about the way she had looked at his mother. The genuine warmth of it. The complete absence of agenda. He had spent 15 years building walls around himself that were specifically designed to keep people with agendas at a safe distance. Those walls were load-bearing. They held up the entire structure of his life. It had never occurred to him to wonder what would happen if someone simply had no agenda to keep out. The visits became regular. Every Wednesday and Saturday, Os came to the Park residence after her morning shift. She and Mrs. Park cooked together sometimes. Mrs. Park teaching Os to make doenjang jjigae, and Os teaching Mrs. Park the basic principles of Nigerian seasoning, which Mrs. Park approached with the focused enthusiasm of someone who takes new knowledge seriously. They watched Korean dramas. They took slow walks in the garden when the weather was clear enough. Jin-woo was often present in the house during these visits. Not in the same room, usually, but present, moving through the house with his particular quiet intensity, occasionally pausing at the door of the sitting room to speak to his mother about something, and in those moments always very briefly acknowledging Os with a nod that was measured and exact and gave nothing away. But the 4th time Os visited, something shifted. She had arrived to find Mrs. Park napping, and Mrs. Yoon had shown her to the garden to wait. Os was sitting on the stone bench near the plum tree when Jin-woo came out of the house and found her there. He stopped. He had clearly not expected her to be in the garden. "My mother is sleeping," he said. "I know. I'm waiting." He looked at the bench. He looked at the space beside her. He looked away at the garden and then back at the space beside her again. And then he sat down. There was a silence. "Do you always wait?" he said. "When it's worth it," she said. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the plum tree, which was bare in the winter cold, but had a particular kind of elegant structure to it that you could only appreciate properly when the leaves were gone. "You were at the restaurant in Mapo," he said. 3 weeks before my mother's incident. The alley." Os turned to look at him. He was looking at the garden. "You remember that," she said. It was not a question. "I remember everything relevant." "Am I relevant?" He was quiet for a moment. "You saved my mother's life. That makes me relevant to you." "Yes." Os considered this. "The man in that alley. Chitty. Have you dealt with him?" Jin-woo's jaw moved very slightly. "He is no longer your concern." Os looked at him carefully. There was something both reassuring and unsettling about the completeness of that statement. She had not heard from Chitty since that night. His number went unanswered. His apartment in Itaewon, where she had once been foolish enough to go, appeared to be empty. She did not know exactly what dealt with meant in Jin-woo's vocabulary. She was not certain she wanted to know. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me," she said. Jin-woo finally turned to look at her directly. At this range, with nothing between them and no hospital bed or sitting room furniture providing the usual architectural comfort of organized social spaces, she could see his face more clearly. The discipline in it. The control that was not coldness, but something that had been layered over something deeper over a long period of time. "He put his hand on you," Jin-woo said. "On my street. In my city. That is not because of you. That is because of him." Os held his gaze. "You're protective of your territory. Always. Is that what I am? Your territory." Something moved across his face then. Very fast. Almost imperceptible. But she caught it. "You are someone my mother cares about," he said. "That makes you someone I protect." Os was quiet for a moment. Then, because it was what she actually thought, she said, "You don't have to protect me," Jean was a sigh. "I've been protecting myself for a long time." He looked at her. The use of his name with the formal honorific seemed to land somewhere in him with a weight she had not anticipated. "I know," he said. "I've seen how you protect yourself." She could not tell if it was a compliment or an observation or both. Mrs. Park appeared at the doorway then, wrapped in a sweater, with the particular expression of a woman who has woken up from a nap and come to the garden and found exactly what she was perhaps hoping to find, and is choosing to appear naturally surprised. "You're both out here," she said pleasantly. "Good. Mrs. Yoon is making tea." Jin-woo stood up. He did not look at Os again as he walked toward the house. But at the doorway he paused, and he held the door open, and he waited. It was a small thing. In his world, men did not hold doors. Doors opened for him. That was simply how it worked. But he held the door, and Os walked past him, and the brief proximity of it, the distance of perhaps one full step between them, carried more information than either of them was ready to say out loud. February in Seoul is relentless. It is the month when winter digs in with both hands and refuses to be moved, and the gray of the sky blends into the gray of the concrete until the city looks like it was designed in a single color. Oh stood at the window of her small apartment in Mapo-gu and watched the snow fall on the rooftops, and thought about her brothers back in Benin City, who had never seen snow and who texted her sometimes asking what it felt like. Cold, she always told them, but also quiet in a way that nothing else is. Her phone rang. It was Leah, calling to cancel their Saturday morning plans because of the weather. After the call, Oh sat down at her small kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and opened her notebook where she kept a rough accounting of her finances. She had sent money home last week. She had rent due in 10 days. She had exactly enough, but only exactly enough, and the line between exactly enough and not enough was very thin, and she walked it every month. She was thinking about whether she could pick up an extra shift at the restaurant when her phone rang again. She did not recognize the number. Hello? Os. A man's voice. Korean accent. Very controlled. This is Jinwoo Park. She sat very still. How did you get this number? A beat of silence. My mother gave it to me. Os pressed her lips together and made a mental note to talk to Mrs. Park about that, and then immediately felt something warm and contradictory that made the mental note softer at its edges. What do you need? She said. My mother is asking for you. She is not unwell, he added quickly, and the quickness of it told her something. She wants company. The snow has kept the household staff delayed. I have a meeting I cannot cancel. She is restless. Os looked out at the snow. You're asking me to come keep your mother company. I am telling you that she would like you to come. The car will be there in 15 minutes if you say yes. Os looked at her notebook with its thin margins and its careful numbers. She looked at the snow. She thought about Mrs. Park in the big quiet house in Songbuk-dong with her blanket and her tea, and that particular loneliness that spacious houses amplify. Fine, she said. Give me 10 minutes. He arrived to his meeting late because he personally supervised the car picking Os up, standing at the window of his office watching the GPS track the vehicle through the snow-slowed streets, which was not something he would have admitted to anyone. He came home to the house in Songbuk-dong at 7 in the evening to find his mother, and Os at the kitchen table with a bowl of jollof rice between them that smelled extraordinary and a Korean drama playing on his mother's tablet at low volume. His mother was laughing at something Os had just said with a fullness of laughter that he had not heard from her in months. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his coat and looked at this scene. His mother noticed him. Jinwoo. Os made jollof rice. Come and eat. I've eaten, he said, which was true in the narrow technical sense that he had consumed a sandwich in his car at midday and had not eaten since. Sit down, his mother said. He sat down. Os got up and got a bowl without being asked and served him from the pot on the stove, and when she set the bowl in front of him she looked briefly at his face with that particular regard she had, the one that saw more than it should, and she said, You haven't eaten. I said I have. Hours ago, if at all. She sat back down. Eat. His mother was watching them with the carefully neutral expression she had been deploying for weeks now. Jinwoo looked at the bowl of jollof rice. He picked up his chopsticks. He ate. It was the best thing he had eaten in weeks, which he did not say out loud, but which was obvious from the fact that he finished the entire bowl and sat for a moment afterward looking at it. Good, Os asked, in the tone of someone who already knows the answer. Acceptable, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. His mother looked between them and decided that she needed a glass of water from the kitchen, which was the room they were all already sitting in, and excused herself to get it. You lied, Os said when Mrs. Park stepped away. I haven't lied. You said acceptable. It was acceptable. Jinwoo sigh, she said, with the particular patience of someone who is choosing to be patient. I watched you finish that entire bowl without looking up once. That is not acceptable. That is very good and you know it. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the smallest possible motion. It happened and was gone in less than a second. But she saw it, and something in her chest moved in response. Mrs. Park returned with her glass of water and sat down and began telling Os about the drama they had been watching, and the conversation folded back into ordinary things, and the moment passed. But Jinwoo sat at the table for another hour. He sat and listened to his mother's voice, warm and continuous, and Osa's voice responding to it. And something that had been pulled very tight in him for a very long time began, without his permission, to loosen slightly. He did not examine it closely. He was not ready for that. March came and brought the first hints of warmth, and with the warmth came new problems. Dae-young came to Jin-woo's office on a Wednesday morning and closed the door, which he only did when the news was the kind that needed a closed door. "The Jong organization is moving into Mapo-gu," he said. He set a folder on the desk. "Property acquisitions. Quiet ones. They're setting up a new distribution corridor." Jin-woo opened the folder. He looked at the maps and the property records and the names. He was quiet for a very long time. "The restaurant district," he said finally. Yes, the Mapo-gu restaurant district was where Os worked. Jin-woo did not say this. He did not need to say it for Dae-young to understand it. Dae-young was perceptive in the way that people who have worked closely with Jin-woo for 10 years needed to be perceptive. "Make sure the restaurant on Seongmapo-ro is protected," Jin-woo said with perfect neutrality. Dae-young nodded. "Already arranged. And I want to know every move the Jong organization makes in that district. Every single one." There was more in the folder. The Jong organization was not acting alone. They had a new partner, a foreign element. And when Jin-woo read the name of the intermediary involved, his hands tightened very slightly on the edge of the folder. Chitty. Chitty was alive then. Dealt with had apparently meant warned, not removed. That would need to be revisited. He closed the folder. "Full surveillance. No action yet. I want information first." "Yes, sir." Dae-young left. Jin-woo sat alone in his office and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling window. From this height, Seoul looked organized. It looked like it all made sense. The grid of streets, the flow of traffic, the clusters of light. From inside it, things were more complicated. He thought about a woman sitting at his mother's kitchen table, laughing at something on a tablet. He thought about rice and the smell of it and a bowl that had been placed in front of him without being asked for. He pressed the intercom. "Get me Kim Soo-jin." Kim Soo-jin was the best information officer he had. She could track anything. Within 6 hours, Jin-woo knew exactly what Chitty was involved in, who his contacts were, and what specifically he had planned for Mapo-gu. He also knew that part of the plan involved using Os. He read that part 3 times. Then he called Dae-young back. Os did not know any of this. She was finishing the Saturday afternoon shift, wiping down tables, thinking about whether she should call her mother tonight or wait until Sunday when she would have more time. When Leah texted her asking if she wanted to come over for dinner. She texted back yes, and was pulling on her coat when the restaurant owner, Mr. O, came to find her looking troubled. "Someone was asking about you today," he said. "A man. He said he was a friend of yours from Nigeria." Os went very still. "What did he look like?" Mr. O described him. The description matched Chitty. "What did you tell him?" Os asked. "Nothing. I said I didn't know you well." Mr. O hesitated. "Os, are you in some kind of trouble?" She looked at the man, who had employed her for a year and a half and had never been unkind to her, and she said, "I will be fine. But if he comes back, please don't tell him anything about my schedule." She walked out of the restaurant and immediately called the number that Jin-woo had called her from. It rang twice. "He was at my restaurant," she said when Jin-woo answered. A very brief silence. "I know. My men are on him. Don't go home tonight." Oh stopped walking. Around her, the Saturday evening crowd of Mapo-gu moved past. A couple argued about which restaurant to choose. A group of students took selfies outside a dessert cafe. The ordinary world, completely indifferent. "Where am I supposed to go?" she said. "Songbuk-dong." She pressed her lips together. Jin-woo's eye. "Os." His voice was very even, very controlled. But underneath the control there was something she had not heard from him before. Something that had an edge to it. "Please." She had never heard him say please before. She got in the car that appeared at the curb within 3 minutes. The house in Songbuk-dong was quieter at night. The garden was lit by small lights along the path, and the plum tree was beginning to bud with the first tentative green of early spring. And O sat in the sitting room with Mrs. Park and drank tea, and let the older woman talk about her garden and her children when they were small, and a trip she had once taken to Jeju Island. But the house was not entirely quiet. At some point after midnight, voices in the corridor outside. Low and tense. Jin-woo and Dae-young, from the sound of it. Then other voices she did not recognize. Mrs. Park did not react to the voices. She simply poured more tea. He will handle it, she said, without Os having asked. I know he will, Os said. Then, because she was herself and not someone who avoided difficult things, she said, How long has it been like this? His life. Mrs. Park was quiet for a moment. Since he was 23. He took it over when things were very difficult for the family. He did it to protect us. He has been doing it ever since. She set her cup down. He is a good man, Os. I know what the world says about men like him. But in here, she pressed a hand to her chest. He is a good man. Os looked at the tea in her cup. I believe you, she said. And she did. She had seen enough of Jin-woo over the past weeks to understand that the armor was real, but the person inside it was also real. That the two things existed simultaneously, and that knowing one did not negate the other. She fell asleep on the sofa in the sitting room sometime around 2 a.m. When she woke, there was a blanket over her that had not been there before, and the lamp beside her had been dimmed. She lay still for a moment. She looked at the ceiling of the Park family's sitting room with its particular quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with age and money and years of careful protection. And she thought about her apartment in Mapo-gu with its thin walls, and the sound of the neighbors, and the particular kind of vigilance that had become second nature to her in the years she had been living in Seoul. She had not slept this well in months. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes again. In the hallway, Jin-woo stood very still for exactly 30 seconds outside the door of the sitting room before he turned and walked toward his office. He had gone in to check that she was settled. He had found her asleep. He had stood there and looked at her face in the dimmed lamplight with all the careful control in him pointed inward at a feeling he was not yet prepared to name. Then he had turned off the overhead light and left. In the morning, Dae-young briefed him. Chitty had been picked up near Yongsan. He was being held at a location Jin-woo controlled. The Jong organization's Mapo-gu operation had been disrupted. 3 properties had been frozen through financial channels that Jin-woo's organization controlled through legitimate shell companies. And Chitty's arrangement with the Jong group? Jin-woo asked. Dead. Jong has already pulled back. They don't want the exposure. Jin-woo nodded. What was Chitty's plan with Os specifically? Dae-young was careful about this. He knew the answer was personal. He believed she had information about your family's movements through her visits to this house. He was going to use her as a pressure point against you. The Jong organization wanted leverage. Jin-woo was quiet for a very long time. He was going to use her, he repeated. Yes. Not because she knew anything. She doesn't know anything. He knew that. He was going to force her to get it. The particular stillness that came over Jin-woo in that moment was the kind that Dae-young recognized from years of experience. It was not anger. Anger moved. This was the thing that came before the thing that moved, and it was much more dangerous. Handle it, Jin-woo said. Completely. Every detail. Dae-young left. Jin-woo went to the kitchen where Os was sitting at the table with his mother, both of them eating breakfast and talking about something that involved his mother demonstrating a hand gesture and Os laughing, and for a moment he stood in the doorway and just looked at it. His mother noticed him. Breakfast. He sat down. He did not look at Os directly. He was aware that she was watching him with that perceptive attention of hers, and that she was probably reading more from his face than he wanted her to read. After a moment she said, quietly, so his mother would not hear over the sound of the news she had turned on the tablet. Is it handled? He looked at her then. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. Is he safe? Jin-woo understood what she was asking. She was asking him not to hurt Chitty. Or more precisely, she was asking him not to do something irreversible. He thought about what Chitty had planned. He thought about the alley in February. He thought about the way she had stood there with her chin up and her back against the wall and not cried. He'll be encouraged to leave Seoul, Jin-woo said. Permanently. Os looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded and looked down at her breakfast. That was all. No speech about it. No relief-filled effusiveness. No dramatic moment. Just the nod and the looking away. And somehow that was more than anything she could have said. Jin-woo's phone buzzed. He answered it. Business. Always business. He stood and walked to the corridor. But in the kitchen doorway he paused, and he said to his mother, without looking at Os, the driver will take her home whenever she's ready. His mother smiled at her tea. For weeks later, a new crisis arrived. It arrived wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase and calling itself Kim Byung-chul. And it was the kind of crisis that Jin-woo had been waiting for since the Jong organization's Mapo operation had failed. Kim Byung-chul was the external auditor assigned to one of Jin Woo's legitimate businesses, a real estate development company that managed several large projects in Gangnam. He was also, as it turned out, on the payroll of a man named Shin Tae-il, who was the person behind the Jong organization's failed operation, and who had now decided to approach the problem from a different direction. The problem was this: Jin Woo's legitimate businesses were the scaffolding behind which the rest of his operations existed. If someone with enough knowledge, enough evidence, and enough government connections could damage those legitimate businesses, the resulting investigation could destabilize everything. Shin Tae-il had that knowledge. He had been collecting it for 2 years, fed to him by a source inside Jin Woo's organization. Jin Woo found out about the source on a Tuesday morning when Dae-young came to his office with a face that had no color in it. "It's Park Jun-ho," Dae-young said. Jin Woo put down his pen. Park Jun-ho had been with him for 7 years. He was not a foot soldier. He was not peripheral. He was one of 4 men who sat in Jin Woo's inner circle. He had access to financial records. He knew the connections between the legitimate businesses and the operations behind them. Jin Woo was quiet for so long that Dae-young began to wonder if he had heard. Then he said, "Bring him to me." What followed was the kind of confrontation that does not have raised voices or dramatic speeches. It is done in a quiet room, with 2 men sitting across from each other, and the one who has been betrayed asking questions, and the one who has done the betraying understanding that the answer will be everything. Park Jun-ho was offered a choice. It was a specific and limited choice, but it was a choice because Jin Woo had not been changed by his world so completely that he had lost the capacity for that kind of precision. He was not a man who enjoyed cruelty. He was a man who understood the necessity of consequences. Jun-ho took the choice. He was gone from Seoul within 72 hours. The damage he had done, however, took longer to contain. 3 government officials had received Shin Tae-il's information packet. 2 of them had been handled through channels that Jin Woo's organization maintained for exactly these contingencies. The 3rd was proving more difficult. It was during this period, while Jin Woo was managing the fallout from the betrayal and the government pressure simultaneously, that Ose began to see something in him that she had not fully seen before. She came to the house on a Wednesday as usual. She found Mrs. Park quiet and watchful, the way she was when something serious was happening that she knew about but would not discuss. Ose sat with her, and they did not watch a drama today. They sat in the garden in the pale April sunlight and drank tea and listened to the birds. At some point Mrs. Park said, "He is carrying a great deal right now." Ose said nothing. "He does not show it," Mrs. Park continued. "He never shows it. That is the thing about him that worries me most." Ose looked at the plum tree, which was in full blossom now. The buds had opened into small white flowers, and they were delicate and improbable and completely at odds with the cold that had been here just weeks ago. "Is there anything I can do?" she said. Mrs. Park looked at her. "You already do something," she said. "The evenings you are here, he comes home earlier. He eats. He sits. He breathes differently." She paused. "He would never tell you that. He might not even know it himself. But I see it." Ose absorbed this. She thought about the controlled face and the careful eyes and the 2 seconds of held gaze in this garden months ago. She thought about the blanket that had been placed over her while she slept. She thought about the feeling she kept pushing to the back of her mind, the one that had lived there for weeks now, getting quieter and more patient the harder she tried to ignore it. That evening, she was in the kitchen cutting vegetables for soup when Jin Woo came in. He was in his shirt sleeves, jacket gone, tie loosened, which was the closest thing to casual she had ever seen him. He looked tired in a way that only showed around his eyes. He stopped when he saw her. "My mother is resting," Ose said. "I thought I would make soup." He said nothing. He went to the sink, washed his hands with the careful thoroughness of a man who has trained himself to use physical routines to manage internal states. He turned and leaned against the counter and looked at the chopped vegetables on the board. "What kind of soup?" he said. "Pepper soup. Nigerian style. Your mother asked me to teach her the recipe." He was quiet. Then, "May I watch?" She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same expression she had first seen in the hospital room. The puzzlement of a man encountering something his framework does not account for. "You want to learn to cook?" she said. "I want to watch you cook," he said, and there was something in the straightness of this, the lack of embellishment, that carried more weight than any elaborate declaration. She turned back to the vegetables. Then stand there and watch. He stood there. He watched. He was quiet in a way that was not uncomfortable. She talked as she cooked, not performing, just saying the things she usually said when she cooked, explaining the ingredients, explaining why the heat mattered, and why the sequence of adding things mattered, and why the best pepper soup she ever had was made by a woman in her grandmother's neighborhood, who used a specific blend of dried peppers that Ose had never been able to replicate perfectly. Jinwoo listened to all of it. He did not speak much. Once he asked about the scent of a particular spice, and she held the jar out to him, and he smelled it with the focused attention he gave to everything, and his eyes came back up to hers afterward with something in them that she felt in her sternum. When the soup was done and Mrs. Park had come downstairs, and they sat at the table together, Jinwoo ate 2 full bowls. He did not say acceptable this time. He looked at her from across the table and said, "Thank you." 2 words. But she had learned how much weight Jinwoo Park could put into 2 words. "You're welcome," she said. May arrived. The cherry blossoms came and went. The city warmed and opened up, and the Han River parks filled with people on blankets, and the evenings stretched longer. Ose stood at the Han River one Sunday morning with Leah, drinking canned coffee and watching the water, and Leah looked at her sideways and said, "You seem different lately." "Different how?" Ose said. "Lighter. Or more serious. I can't tell which. Maybe both at the same time." Leah paused. "Is it someone?" Ose looked at the water. "It's complicated." "It's always complicated," Leah said. "That doesn't answer the question." Ose was quiet for a moment. She thought about how to explain Jinwoo Park to Leah, who was the most practical and sensible person she knew, and who would have approximately 7 good reasons why any of this was a bad idea. She thought about the blanket and the bowl of soup and the 2 seconds of held gaze, and the way the kitchen had felt with him standing in it watching her cook. "There's a man," she said. "Korean." "Yes. And the complicated part, his world." Ose said simply. "His world is very complicated." Leah was quiet for a moment. "Do you trust him?" The question landed simply and went deep. Ose thought about it honestly. She thought about every person she had trusted in Seoul, the few and the costly. She thought about Chitty and what he had planned to do with her. She thought about Jinwoo holding a door. "I think I might," she said. "I'm not used to that feeling." "What feeling?" "Feeling safe with someone." Leah was quiet. Then she put her arm around Ose's shoulders, and they looked at the river together, and nothing else needed to be said about it. 2 weeks after that conversation, the 3rd crisis arrived. It arrived in the form of a woman named Ji-yeon. Ji-yeon was beautiful in the way of someone who has always known she was beautiful and has arranged her life accordingly. She had been in Jinwoo's life for several years, in the particular peripheral way of people who exist in the orbit of powerful men, never fully in and never fully out. She had connections to Jinwoo's rivals through her family's business interests. She was intelligent and strategic, and she had decided, at some point in the past few months, that her position in Jinwoo's orbit needed to become more central. Ose met her for the first time at the park residence on a Saturday when she had not been expected. She arrived at the gate the same time Ji-yeon's car was pulling away from it, and they looked at each other through the windows for a moment before the other woman's car drove on. Ji-yeon's expression was the specific expression of a woman who has just been shown something she had not expected to see and is deciding how to respond to it. Inside, Mrs. Park was stiffer than usual. "Who was that?" Ose asked. "Ji-yeon," Mrs. Park said. "She comes occasionally." She paused, and the pause carried something. "Jinwoo handles it." "Handles what?" Mrs. Park looked at Ose with those clear, honest eyes. "Ji-yeon believes she has a claim on him. Jinwoo does not agree. But his world makes these things complicated." Ose absorbed this. She kept her face neutral. "How complicated?" "Her family has business ties to 2 organizations that Jinwoo works with. A public rejection would have political cost." Mrs. Park watched Ose carefully. "He has been managing the situation for some time." Ose was quiet. She looked at the garden, at the plum tree in its full green May foliage. "And where do I fit into this?" she said. "Ose, no, I am asking genuinely." She turned back to Mrs. Park. "I am not angry. I am trying to understand what I am walking into." Mrs. Park set down her tea. "You are walking into nothing you have not already chosen to walk into," she said. "You knew what his world was. I knew in the abstract. And now you know more concretely." Ose was quiet for a long time. "Does he care about her?" she asked. No, Mrs. Park said, with the certainty of a woman who knows her son completely. He has never cared about her. He has been protecting something else entirely. Ose looked at her. He has been protecting the possibility, Mrs. Park said simply, of something worth caring about. Ose walked home that evening rather than taking the car. She needed the air and the distance and the time that walking gives you. She walked through Songbuk-dong and down through the streets toward Mapo-gu, an hour and a half, and she used the time to think very carefully and very honestly about everything. She thought about what she stood to lose and what she stood to gain. She thought about her family in Benin City and what her mother would say, and what her aunt, who had very specific opinions about Korean men, would say. And she almost laughed at the image of explaining Jinwoo Park to her aunt over a phone call. She thought about what she had come to Seoul for. She had come for survival, for the money to help her family, for the distance that young people sometimes need from the places that form them in order to find out who else they might be. She had not come for this. But here it was. She thought about the woman she had saved on a cold sidewalk in February, and how that moment had been a thread that led to other moments, and how life works like that sometimes, pulling you toward things you could not have navigated toward directly. She got home and made herself dinner and called her mother. Her mother's voice, warm and practical and full of the specific love that Nigerian mothers carry in their voices, asked her how she was, asked about work, asked about Seoul, and then, because mothers know things without being told them, asked, "How is your heart?" Ose looked out her kitchen window at the Seoul night sky, the city lights against the darkness, the shape of it from this small and particular window. "My heart is learning something new," she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is it a good something?" "I think so," Ose said. "I'm not certain yet." "Uncertainty is not the same as bad," her mother said. "Sometimes it just means the thing is new." Ose smiled at the window. "Okay, Mama." Jinwoo came to find her at the restaurant the next Wednesday. Not the car, not a phone call. He came himself. He sat down at a table near the window with his collar turned up against the May wind. And when Ose came out of the kitchen and saw him sitting there among the regular lunchtime customers, she stopped. He looked at her. He was waiting. She walked over. She stood at the table with her order pad. She said, "What are you doing here?" "Having lunch," he said. "Jinwoo SSI." He looked down at the laminated menu on the table with the expression of a man who has never had to read a laminated menu in his adult life and is finding the experience instructive. "What do you recommend?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The bibimbap. Mr. O makes it well." "Bibimbap," he said, and set the menu down. She put in the order. She served 3 other tables. She came back with his food and set it in front of him and stood there with her order pad and her apron and her chin up and said, "My mother always says that if a man wants to say something, he should say it." Jinwoo looked at the bibimbap. He looked up at her. "Jian is not a concern," he said. "She was never a concern. I want that to be clear." Ose kept her expression neutral. "That is not your decision alone." "No," he said. "It is not." He held her gaze. "I am here because I wanted to see you. I wanted to come here, to your place, not my house, not my car, not on my terms. Here, where you work, where you are yourself." Ose looked at him. "I wanted you to know that I see you," he said. "Not what you did for my mother. Not what your background check says. Not what my world makes you from a security perspective. You." He was very still. "I see you, Ose." The restaurant was busy around them. Mr. O was calling orders from the kitchen. A child at the next table was refusing to finish her noodles. Everything was ordinary and moving and completely indifferent. Ose looked at Jinwoo Park sitting at the most ordinary table in the most ordinary restaurant in Mapo-gu, and she thought about every wall she had built and every wall he had built, and she thought about how walls are sometimes just proof of what you are afraid to lose. "Eat your bibimbap," she said quietly, "before it gets cold." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up his chopsticks. She went back to work. But at the door of the kitchen she paused and glanced back, and he was watching her. She turned away before he could see the smile, but she felt it all the way through her chest. June. The heat arrived. The city opened its windows and spilled out onto its streets, and the energy of Seoul in summer was its own particular alive thing. The situation with the government official, the third one who had received Shin Taeil's information packet, reached its resolution through a set of negotiations that Jin-woo conducted himself over 3 weeks of quiet meetings in places where nothing was written down. The resolution was not perfect. Nothing in Jin-woo's world was ever perfectly resolved. But it was stable, and stability was the thing he maintained above all others. Shin Tae-il proved more difficult. He was not a simple criminal. He had legitimate connections and political cover and a patience that matched Jin-woo's own. The conflict between them settled into a cold standoff, each watching the other, each measuring the distance. During this period, Jin-woo became careful with Ose in a new way. He was careful about her visibility. He did not want her connected to him in ways that could make her a target. The visits to Songbuk-dong continued, but were managed with a discreet precision that she was aware of but did not comment on. The car that took her home each evening varied in its route. The men who watched her from a distance were professionals who understood that their assignment was to be invisible. One evening in June, she came out of the restaurant to find the car waiting as usual, and she got in and found Jin-woo already sitting in the back seat. She looked at him. "My mother has a dinner she would like us both to attend," he said. "Both of us?" "Yes." Ose was quiet. "Who else will be there?" "A few family members. My mother's sister. Her husband. Some of their children." He paused. "My mother has apparently been talking about you." Ose took a slow breath. "How has she been talking about me?" He looked out the window. "Warmly," he said. She looked at his profile, the controlled line of his jaw, the precise way he held himself even in the back seat of a car. "Is this what you want?" she said. He turned to look at her. They were very close in the back seat of the car. The proximity had been becoming more loaded by degrees over the past weeks, a slow accumulation of closeness and constraint. "I don't bring people into my family's gatherings," he said. "I never have. Not in 15 years. She looked at him. "Yes," he said. "This is what I want." The dinner was in the private dining room of a restaurant in Gangnam. Mrs. Park's sister was a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who took one long look at Ose when they were introduced, and then looked at Jin-woo with the expression of a woman updating several previously held opinions simultaneously. There was a period of adjustment. There was the particular quality of attention that a Korean family turns on an unknown quantity. Ose felt it and did not shrink from it. She answered questions directly. She spoke about herself honestly and without apology. She listened carefully and asked questions in return that showed she was actually listening. By the end of the dinner, Mrs. Park's sister had moved her chair slightly closer to Ose's end of the table and was sharing a story about her own time living abroad that she had apparently not shared before at a family gathering. On the drive home, Jin-woo sat beside Ose in the back seat and said nothing for a long time. The city moved past the windows. Mrs. Park was riding in the car behind them. "You were remarkable tonight," he said finally. "I was just myself," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I said." She looked at him. He was looking at her in the particular way he had been looking at her for weeks now, the way that was a question he was working up to asking. "Jin-woo," she said. Her voice was quiet. "What are we doing?" He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved. The lights moved. The driver did not turn around. "I don't know how to do this," Jin-woo said. And the admission of it, from this man who did not admit to not knowing how to do things, had a weight to it that she felt in her whole body. "I know how to protect. I know how to manage. I know how to maintain." He paused. "I don't know how to." He stopped. "Be with someone," she finished quietly. He looked at her. Yes, she thought about this, about the learning curve of it, for both of them. She thought about her own history with men and trust, and what those things had cost her. She thought about her mother's voice. "Uncertainty is not the same as bad." "Then we'll both learn," she said. Slowly, without rushing it. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he put his hand, carefully, deliberately, over hers where it rested on the seat between them. She turned her hand over. She held his. The city kept moving outside the windows. Somewhere a bridge crossed the Han River with its lights strung along it. The summer night was warm and full of things that had no language yet. They sat like that, with their hands together and the city going by, until the car turned into Mapogu. July. August. The summer moved through itself. Jin-woo was not easy to be in a relationship with. He was not easy in the small ways, the ways that had nothing to do with power or danger. the ways that were simply about a person who had spent 15 years maintaining total control of everything around him. He found it difficult to say uncertain things. He found it difficult to ask for what he wanted instead of simply arranging for it to exist. He found it difficult to let silence be companionable rather than strategic. Ose had her own difficult things. She had built a specific kind of independence that was partly strength and partly armor, and learning to let someone in was learning to distinguish between the two. She had a history with people who promised safety and delivered danger. She had learned to trust her own judgment and to be skeptical of the judgments of others. But they learned. They learned through small things. Through conversations in the kitchen of the Songbukdong house that ran long past what either of them had intended. Through walks along the Han River on Sunday mornings where Jinwoo did not look at his phone and Ose did not ask about the things she could sense him processing internally. Through arguments which were specific and useful because Ose argued the way she did everything else, directly and without theater, and Jinwoo argued by going very quiet and very precise, and learning to read each other through those differences was itself a form of intimacy. Through the night in August when Ose was sick with a bad cold and Jinwoo appeared at her apartment door with soup from a Korean pharmacy, and a thermometer, and a completely blank expression that was the most transparent he had ever been in his life. She stood in her doorway in her pajamas with her nose red from fever, and she looked at him standing there with soup and a thermometer, and she said, "How did you know I was sick?" "You didn't text to confirm Saturday," he said. "You always confirm." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. He made her eat the soup. He stayed for 2 hours. He sat on the far end of her small sofa and read something on his phone while she dozed under a blanket. And when she woke up, he had moved the blanket over her shoulders. And he was looking at her with an expression that was not blank at all. She looked at him from under the blanket. "You're going to be fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." She smiled. He looked at the smile. Something happened in his face that he let happen, just briefly, before the practiced composure came back. She went back to sleep. When she woke again, he was gone. There was a glass of water on the table beside her and a note that said, "Doctor, if it gets worse." His name below it in Korean characters, and below that, in English letters, Jinwoo. She folded the note and kept it. September came with its cooling air and its returning sense of urgency. The cold standoff with Shin Tae-il escalated in September in a way that had been building for months. The escalation came through Jinwoo's legitimate businesses again, but this time more directly. A series of regulatory investigations were opened simultaneously, clearly coordinated, clearly designed to overwhelm Jinwoo's legal and financial teams. It was the move of a patient man who had been watching for the right moment. Jinwoo worked 20-hour days for 3 weeks. Ose saw him rarely during this period. When she did, she could see the cost of it in the tightness around his eyes and the particular quality of his silences. She did not try to fix it. She did not try to insert herself into the crisis. She understood that there were parts of his world she was not part of and was not meant to be part of. She continued her visits with Mrs. Park. She continued her life. But on the Wednesday evening in the 3rd week, when she came to the Park house and found him still at his desk at 10 at night, still working, with dinner untouched on a tray beside him, she did something she had not done before. She walked in, moved the dinner tray to his desk, pulled the chair beside him closer, and sat down. He looked at her. "You should eat," she said. "I will. Now." He looked at her for a long moment with those dark, precise eyes. Then he picked up his chopsticks. She sat beside him while he ate. She did not talk. She did not look at his work. She was simply there, in the room, steady and real, and she thought that perhaps this was the most useful thing she could offer a man like him. Not solutions, not advice. The simple, undeniable presence of another person who chose to stay. He finished eating. He set down his chopsticks. He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight of the study, with the city quiet outside the windows and the house still around them, he looked at her with everything that he normally kept completely contained, and it was not a small thing. "I don't know what I would do without you," he said. She held his gaze. "Then you don't have to find out." He reached over and touched her face with one hand, very carefully, the way you touch something that matters to you. His thumb moved very slowly along her cheekbone. "I'm not easy," he said. "I know. I may never be easy." "I know that too," she said. "I'm not asking you to be easy. I'm asking you to be honest with me. He held her face in his hand and looked at her for a long, very still moment. I love you, he said. It came out flat and direct and completely without decoration. The way he said everything that was most true. I've been trying to find the right time to say it. I don't think there is a right time. I think there is just now. She felt the warmth of it move through her entire body. She felt the thing that had been living in her chest for months settle into its proper shape. I love you too, she said. I've known for a while. He looked at her. How long? Since you held the door, she said. He was quiet. Then the corner of his mouth moved. And this time she watched the smile develop slowly and fully, and it changed his face entirely. And she thought she had never seen anything more worth waiting for. She leaned forward and kissed him. Simple. Direct. No performance. He kissed her back with the particular focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. October. November. Winter came back, and the city pulled its coat around itself again. Shin Tae-il made his last move in November. It was not through legal channels this time. It was through a car, on a road in Songbuk-dong, on an evening when Jin-woo was returning from a meeting. Jin-woo walked away from it. Barely. Two of the men with him did not. The city went very quiet in the way that Jin-woo's city went quiet after something serious. The ripple moved outward from the incident in widening circles that only people inside the underground world could read. Os was at her apartment when Dae-young called her. He's at the hospital, Dae-young said. He's asking for you. She was in the car within 4 minutes. He had a broken rib and a deep laceration on his forearm and a concussion that the doctors were monitoring. He was sitting up in the hospital bed with the look of a man who is furious that he is in a hospital bed, wearing a hospital gown, with a doctor telling him what he could and could not do. When Os walked in, he went quiet. She sat down beside the bed. She looked at him. He looked at her. She took his hand, the hand that did not have the 4-line, and she held it. I'm fine, he said. I know, she said. You look terrible, but I know. He exhaled. Something in him released. She could feel it in the way his hand relaxed in hers. They won't let me leave, he said. They're right not to. I have things to handle. Dae-young will handle them. Os. Jin-woo. She looked at him steadily. You are going to stay in this bed tonight, and you are going to let your ribs rest. And in the morning we can talk about what needs to be done. But tonight you stay. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that garden in February. The look of a man encountering something his framework does not account for. Then he settled back against the pillows. Fine, he said. She stayed through the night. She slept in the chair beside the bed, which was uncomfortable and which she did not complain about. Mrs. Park came in the morning with Mrs. Yoon, and the specific efficiency of a woman who has handled hospital vigils before. She took Os's hands and looked at her daughter-in-law in all but name and said, Thank you for staying. Where else would I go? Os said simply. Mrs. Park kissed her cheek. Shin Tae-il's organization did not survive the winter. What happened to it was not something that was discussed in public or recorded anywhere or attributed to anyone. It simply ceased to operate, in the way that things cease to operate when a sufficient concentration of force is brought to bear on them at the right pressure points. Jin-woo handled it while his ribs healed, and Os brought him food in the study, and they argued about whether he was doing too much too soon. And she won those arguments with the particular patience of a woman who has understood that winning quietly is more effective than winning loudly, and he conceded to them with the particular grace of a man who has learned that being overruled by someone you trust is a different thing from being overpowered by someone you don't. December. The city put up its lights. The river reflected them. The streets filled with people shopping and eating, and making the particular noise of a city getting ready for the end of one year and the beginning of another. Os called her mother. She talked for a long time. She told her about Jin-woo. All of it. The real version, not the simplified version or the careful version. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was how Os knew she was taking it seriously. At the end, her mother said, Is he good to you? Yes, Os said. Is he honest with you? Yes. Do you feel safe? Os looked across the room at Jin-woo, who was sitting in the low chair beside the window reading something, his glasses on, his collar open, looking more human and more vulnerable than he ever looked in public. More than I've ever felt, she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Bring him to us. They went to Benin City in January. Jin-woo, who who had stood in rooms with government ministers and rival crime bosses and never shown a single degree of nervousness, was visibly and endearingly anxious about meeting Osa's mother. He did not show it in obvious ways. But she knew him now. She could see it in the particular stillness that was not his usual controlled stillness, but the stillness of someone working very hard to appear fine. They were in the taxi from the airport when she put her hand over his. He looked at her. "She's going to love you," Os said. "You don't know that." "I know her," she said. "And I know you." Her mother was standing at the door when the taxi pulled up to the family house, and the way she looked at Os when she stepped out of the car was the particular look that mothers have that costs them nothing and means everything. She looked at Jinwoo. He bowed respectfully. He offered her the gifts they had brought, wine and chocolates, and a very nice shawl that Os had selected for him. He said in careful, practiced English, "Mrs. Osa's mother, it is an honor to meet you." Osa's mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and took his hands in hers and said, "Come inside. You must be hungry." Os watched her mother lead Jinwoo Park into the family home, and she put her hand over her mouth and smiled, and something she had been carrying for a very long time, the particular weight of being far from home, of being divided between two worlds, of not knowing if there was a version of her life where all the different parts of her could exist in the same place, began to lift. Not completely, not all at once, but enough that she could breathe differently. They stayed for 5 days. Jinwoo ate a goosey soup and jollof rice and fried plantain, and pronounced all of it better than acceptable, which made Osa's younger brothers laugh and Osa's mother beam. He sat on the veranda in the evenings and listened to Osa's family talk, and he asked questions, real questions, the kind that show you are listening to understand rather than listening to respond. On the 3rd evening, Osa's mother found Os alone in the kitchen and said, "He looks at you like you are the most important thing he has ever seen." Os looked at the window. "He doesn't say it much." "He doesn't need to say it," her mother said. "It's in every room he walks into with you. I see it." They came back to Seoul in late January. The city was cold again, the way it had been when Os first helped Mrs. Park on that sidewalk a year ago. The will had come around. Jinwoo asked her to move in on a Tuesday evening. He said it in the kitchen of the Songbukdong house, very directly, the way he said all the important things, with no ornamentation and no preamble. "I don't want you to go home every night," he said. "I want you to be here." She looked at him across the kitchen table. "Your mother's house," she said. "My house," he said. "It has been my house for 15 years. She thought about her apartment in Mapo-gu with its thin walls and its careful budget. She thought about the distance between that life and this one, and whether the distance was a problem or simply a fact. "I keep my own things," she said. "My own schedule. My own choices." "Always," he said immediately. "And I keep the restaurant job until I decide otherwise." "Not until you decide otherwise." His jaw tightened slightly. She waited. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she said. She moved in on a Saturday in February. She brought 2 bags and her cooking pot and her grandmother's wooden spoon. She put the wooden spoon in the kitchen, and Mrs. Park saw it. There the next morning and did not move it, and Os noticed that Mrs. Park did not move it, and that was its own kind of welcome. The plum tree in the garden bloomed again in March. It was the 2nd time Os had seen it bloom. She stood in the garden with her coffee in the early morning, before the house woke up, before the day made its demands, and she looked at the white blossoms against the pale gray sky. She heard the door. She did not turn around. Jinwoo came to stand beside her. They stood in the garden together looking at the tree. The city was beginning to wake up beyond the walls. The birds were making the particular noise of birds in early spring, testing the air. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. 2 people in the morning light of a garden, very quiet, very real. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked at the blossoms. "I'm thinking about the woman on the sidewalk," she said. "The night I helped your mother. I was so cold and I was so tired and I almost kept walking." He was quiet. "I didn't know what I was choosing," she said. "I just knew I couldn't leave her there." His arm tightened slightly around her. "I'm glad you didn't keep walking," he said. She smiled. She tilted her head back and looked at the sky, which was beginning to turn from gray to the particular blue of early morning in Seoul in the spring. "Me too," she said. 18 months later, in the September of the following year, there was a small ceremony in the garden of the Songbukdong house. Small meant 30 people. Family. A few trusted people from Jinwoo's world. Leah, who cried from the moment she arrived and was still crying when the food was served. Osa's mother and both brothers, who had flown from Benin City and who were standing in Jinwoo Park's garden eating doenjang jjigae and talking to Mrs. Park's sister as if they had known each other for years. Os wore a dress that was neither Korean nor Nigerian, but something she had designed herself with a seamstress in Itaewon. A woman who had listened to what Os wanted and made something that was exactly itself and nothing else. Jinwoo stood in the garden in a suit with no tie and his collar open, and looked at her when she came out of the house with an expression that contained, for once, without any concealment at all, everything he felt. She stopped in front of him. She looked at his face. "You're not composed," she said. "No," he said. "Is that difficult?" "Yes," he said. Then, after a moment, "No." She reached up and straightened his collar, the way she had seen Mrs. Park do to him once. The particular gesture of someone who is allowed to touch you without asking. He caught her hand. He held it. Around them, the September garden was warm and full of people talking and the smell of food and the sound of children, Mrs. Park's grandnephews who had brought chaos with them from the moment they arrived. "Are you ready?" he said. She looked at him. At this man who had walked into an alley and said go home in a voice that she had not understood until later. At this man who held doors and put blankets over sleeping women and came to small restaurants and sat at laminated menu tables to say things that mattered to him. "Yes," she said. They stood before the officiant with their hands held between them, and Os looked at the plum tree from the corner of her eye, bare of blossoms now in the September warmth but green and full and entirely itself. And she thought about every cold night and long shift and thin-walled apartment and careful calculation that had been the fabric of her life in Seoul before any of this. She had come here to survive. She had stayed because surviving had turned into something else. Something that did not have a simple word for it, because it was larger than any single word could hold. It was the sum of all the small moments. The soup and the garden and the held door and the blanket. The 2 seconds of eye contact. The direct confession in a moving car. A note beside a glass of water that said, Jinwoo. The officiant spoke. Jinwoo responded in the particular voice he reserved for things that were absolutely true. Os responded in her own voice, steady and direct and warm. The voice of a woman who has crossed an ocean and survived a city and learned the difference between armor and walls and love, and who now stands in a garden in the city of Seoul with the city of Benin living inside her chest alongside everything else she has become. The plum tree blossomed in spring. It would blossom again next spring. And the spring after that. That was how things were now. That was how things would be. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. You are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Now I want to ask you something. Who do you think was right, and who do you think was wrong in this story? Was there a moment where Jinwoo went too far? Was there a moment where Os should have walked away, but didn't? What was the scene that hit you the hardest? Drop your answers in the comments. And while you're there, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know what part of the world is receiving this story tonight. If this moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who believes in love that is tested and chosen and fought for. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because the next story is already being written, and it might be even more powerful than this one. Until then, take care of each other. Real love has no borders, and neither does this community.